Shot, Steel, and Stone rules for Wargaming, the horse and musket era in European, oh, that's not me, and colonial, hey, that's me, settings. The Bare Essentials by Henry Hyde. This is a set of rules. It's a rather slim tome. Don't let that fool you. This is an update of the rules that Henry presents in his first magnum opus. Can you have two magnum opuses? Would they both be magnum if you did another one that was even more magnumer? I don't know. His first really big tome is called the Wargaming Compendium. The second one is called Wargaming Campaigns, which we've talked about here on the channel. This rule set was included in the former, the Wargaming Compendium. You can get it at Pen and Sword, originally published in 2013. The Campaigns was published in 2022. And I want to flip here back here to the acknowledgments because I get this right. You can also find him, Henry, at patreon.com. You can find him at something called Twitter. We all know what that is now. I don't think he's very active on there. He ran off to Blue Sky, and then also something called Instagram. But Henry's one of the kids out there, so I don't know about those kid websites. We're going to do just a brief flip through, but I got to warn you. Obviously, we do one of these videos while we're making ready to play the game. And I wouldn't be showing you this if I didn't intend to play it myself. However, I got a problem. And you would think I'd know better by now, right? I couldn't find any real source for how many figures you need. One might think that a cover like this, which is a little faded to make the letters pop, it's fine. It looks very nice. But you look at all these figures, and these, of course, the big boys. You look at the pictures. You need a lot of figures to play this game. And so the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that I am seriously going to have to think about how I'm going to represent this, because it is stand-based. And as much as we like our based rule games, look, this is what an actual game looks like. So if you don't have a lot of figures and a lot of terrain, you are going to have to implement some serious kludges. Really nice photography in here. He assumes you're using 15, maybe 25 millimeter figures. And as you can see, close order infantry, you're looking at 6 to a base. Well, how many bases do I need? Well, that depends on how big your units are. Remember, he's covering a very broad swath of warfare. Warfare underwent some very significant changes between the years of, I don't know, like 18, I think it's like 1850, 1685 to 1850. That is, well, if I run my numbers, it's over 100 years, 165 years, a lot of changes. So you have to have some flexibility built into the rules. And of course he does, with unit sizes varying, of course, depending on the era you're in and the kind of formation you're talking about, like skirmishing infantry. So if you have a light infantry skirmishers, you're only going to need 3 guys per base. Well, how big is it going to be? Probably not as big as the like mass ranked guys that they're screening for. So if you have troops that are, where did it go? There's it says it here somewhere. There we go. If it's tiny, you only need 2 bases. So that's your skirmishers, right? And then an understrength unit or a battalion of regiment. So, if they're in support of somebody, you're looking at 4 bases. Normally is 6, large is 8. And I should point out, 2 guns is small. A squadron of cavalry is probably only 2 bases. And then standard operating for inferior cavalry, 3 gun models is normal. The large would be 4 guns or howitzers. So we're looking at anywhere from 2 to 10, with most of your units being at about 6 bases per. All right, well, that's fine. We're going to talk about the rules. Don't worry. I just got to do a little bit of math here so you know what to expect. If you've got 6 bases, and each base has 6 guys, that's 36 figures for a normal battalion, not a problem, right? If you've got loose order infantry and you set the unit before, it's like how the unit typically operates, okay? And then we have camel guns in here just because we're silly billies. We've got room for elephants. Remember, colonial. Maybe I should use these for the campaign I'm running using Jim Webster's Hellfire campaigns. That could happen, but this ain't me, bro. If you've seen the channel and all the figures that I don't have, then that's not me. So let's take a look at again, we're just looking at what you need to get started here, okay? This is the army list for Peninsular War British. And we'll zoom in off camera so you don't have to hear me doing all of this stuff. I know sometimes that gets a little distracting. 6 normal B class unarmored close order, blah, 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 blah. Look, 6 normal units in close order. That means you need 6 units with 6 stands with 6 guys. 6 units of 36 is about 200 figures, and we're not even out of the infantry yet. 1 normal B class skirmishing light infantry unit. All right, well, the good news is light infantry half as much, so we're up to about 200 and what did I say? It's about 18. It's normal size, so that's 6 with 3 18. Yes, we're up to 218. An extra small skirmishing rifle company. The rifle is normally operated as pure skirmishers. So if it's extra small, that's only 2 bases. We only need 6 more guys. And then we need, well, how many cavalry do we need just for the Peninsular War British? Well, 2 small and 1, what is it? 1 small and 2 small. Okay, great. Well, small was only 4 bases. So that means we're only going to need, and those are close order and close order. So we're only going to need, 3 for each base. So what is that? 4 times 3 is 12. So only 36 horse. So that ain't bad. This is probably a really good, rough, and it's implied. Henry never says you have to use these rule sets. And he never says this is the only battle set you can use, the only army list that you can use. He doesn't give us any points. So you may wind up in a situation where you are building your army list based on scenarios. And then 3 gun models or 2 gun models, right? Horse artillery or medium artillery. So that's probably the ratio that's standard for Napoleonic. You've got 8. You effectively have 7 units of infantry with a couple of small attachments. So 7 to 3 to 1. That's about right. But that's a heck of a lot of models. And as you know, I'm gaming in 2 millimeters. So I may wind up saying, I'm just going to use for each of these normal, I'm going to use 3 bases of my 2 millimeter figures to represent these 6 bases. And really, the big thing that happens for me is that with 3 bases, I'm still going to have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 units on the table. Well, I got a 2x3 foot table, and my units are 3 inches across. If I line them up, I'm done, man. There's no more room. Well, okay, guess what, Mr. Wargaming? You just described Napoleonic Wargaming. You're going to have guys, and here we see it, marching in column, and they're not going to be able to spread all the way out along. You're going to have enough guys to win the battle, but you can't get them all to where they need to be because there's just not enough room on the table for it. On the table, this is the same thing that the generals of the Napoleonic era had to worry about. Now that we've got the logistics down to be able to get 100,000 guys into the same battlefield, how do we pack? We can get them there. We can keep them fed, get them there that day, but there's just not enough room for them all to be able to do their job. So this is not a complaint. It's really just an explanation of what you can expect should you decide to dip your toes into the shot, stone, and steel pool. Did I get that right? Yeah. Sometimes I call it shot, stone, and steel. I get it right. It's triple S. So how does the game play? Well, obviously I'm just doing a flip through and I haven't played the game yet. I'm trying to introduce it to you so when we actually do play the game, you've already gone through it. And ultimately he goes through strength points. And here's the other kicker. Here's the other thing we need to worry about is that each of these figures represents a strength point. So as you take wounds, you're being wounded by figure. And when you lose 6 strength points, you take off a base. So if you're gaming in 15 millimeter or 28 millimeter, unless you're blue tacking your figs, you're going to need counters. And I'm going to probably wind up having to do the same thing where I use poker chips, right? I'll use 1 chip for 5 wounds and 1 chip for 1. And when I get up to, I'm going to have to take 12 casualties, right? Because each of my bases is worth 2 of these. A little bit of extra math involved, but we're not too afraid of math here. A scenario may specify that units should be upgraded, downgraded, or allocated. The other thing we should talk about, just as by the way, is that your units, in addition to having size and order, right? Bases are not shown actual size. All right, thank you, Henry. You've got morale class, A, B, and C, elite, steady, and suspect. That's it. Are they good? Are they terrible? Or are they somewhere in between? How does the game actually play? Well, it's kind of oddly written. because he goes through the command structure, there's command radius, how leadership tests work, what happens if a leader is wounded or injured, and then he goes into the move sequence. Oh, okay. That's a little different, right? Like this is a very old school presentation of the rules. The new school method is here's what you need to get started. Here's like how you play through each turn. But here we lay an awful lot of groundwork for how things like leadership tests work. And I get that, man. I get it. It's really important. How good your leader is in this era was game changing. So we got to go through all that. And again, a lot of the battles, particularly in the Napoleonic era, they were not fights to the death. They were fights to the rout, right? I needed to just keep pressure on those guys. And I'm not trying to like kill them all. I just need to break their will to continue to fight. So things like shooting and melee don't particularly have high body counts. I don't think it doesn't read that way, but every wound gives you a chance to every wound that you inflict gives you a chance to break your opponent. So that's kind of interesting. And that's, again, it's pretty standard for Napoleonic, but we'll have to see. Are these rules any good? I don't know. I haven't played them yet. So what do? Well, first we roll for initiative. Okay. And whoever has a better leader is going to get a little bonus. Yeah. Okay. If in the event of drawn scores, re-roll. Relatable. Longtime fans know what I'm talking about. Declare orders. The player's turn it is, declares his intentions for all troops. Okay. So you just say it right out loud. That's kind of neat. Test for leadership, because your leaders can inspire people to move on their own. If they're close enough, then to their leader, then they'll move automatically. If they're a little further away, they're gonna have to pass some kind of a test. So an interesting blend of activation risk and guarantee. And the only thing you're guaranteed is where your big boss is, right? And then there's an interesting little thing for chargers and defenders. He has some very real choices. If your unit is charged, what do you want to do? Stand and take it? Stand and fire? Are you going to countercharge? Right? Very interesting. Some of these orders are voluntary, so he can only issue so many orders. Pretty standard stuff, right? Charge, countercharge, hold, retire. Some of these are compulsory. If your boys are routing, then you got to do it. Got to do it. So we do moves, we do counter charges, and of course, if you fail your nerve to counter charge, then you're going to take a beating, like worse. So interesting choices. For shooting, we're going to go through a normal practice. Check your range, and everything in this is measured in base width, so it's pretty universal. My bases are 1 inch. If your bases are 40 millimeters, I'm going to be measuring everything in inches. You'll be measuring them all in 40 mils. Something like a musket will have a short, medium, and long range of 1 base width. In my case, 1 inch. Medium is 3, and 6 is long range is out to, did I get that right? Yeah, 6 base widths. Artillery is going to be firing 12, 24 inches. No real surprises there. So the actual shooting procedure is to roll a d6 for every base that is firing. I shouldn't say that. It's the following numbers of dice per base. So close order infantry are rolling 3 dice. Right? Ready, aim, volley, fire. If you've got skirmishers, they're only rolling 1 per base. They're always hitting on a 4, 5, or a 6. Of course, there are modifiers based on how far away you are. Now, it's a little bit backwards. Here's just a little wrinkle, little complexity. Some of you guys might freak out at this. All of your modifiers are applied to the die roll, but then he turns around and says, if the score required is a 7, and this is very Warhammer, we get this, right? The way we're really going to do this is, I hit on a 4, 5, or a 6. We'll look at the modifiers in a minute, but any modifier doesn't modify the die roll. It modifies what I need to hit. So if I need to score a 4 or better, and I have a total of -3, I need a 7 to hit. So we roll, we take the 6s, and there's a 50-50 chance each one actually hits. If after I apply the modifiers, I need a 9 or better, I roll all my dice, which in the case of close order, if I've got 6 bases that are unhurt, and I'm rolling 3 dice per base, I'm rolling 18 dice, I'm probably going to roll 3 6s. Then I take those 6s out, I roll those, and I still need a 6 to hit. And if I hit, I'm going to do 1 wound. That's 1 figure removed. This is what I mean by casualty rates aren't terribly high, statistically speaking. Well, your mileage may vary depending on how good your dice rolls are. Now let's take a look at the modifiers here. If you have a dense target, and that means like an infantry square, see, there we go. There's our decision. Do we form square or not? If you're enfilading the target, I think we know what that means. I think it means shooting into a flank, right? Then you're at +1. If you are elite, so here's our first example of what difference that makes. You're at +1 on your die roll, which means your 2 hit goes down by 1, right? So instead of hitting on 4s, I'm hitting on 3s. If the target is at long range, it's -1 to the dice. If the target unit is in fortifications, so it's pretty standard stuff. Wearing heavy armor grants you a -1 to hit, so it's harder to hit. And then, but here's the thing. This is a roll to hit, roll to save. You have to worry about wounding, but only half of your hits are actually, if you're for most of these weapons, are gonna hit. They get a save of 4 up. Bear in mind, a smooth bore cannon, if you're hit by one of those, you're only saving on a 6. Now, that doesn't mean that the cannonball bounces off of you. It just means that you got lucky. You got out of the way just in time. And then we have options for counter battery fire. And here's where I want to pull back a little bit and just warn you that because this is a game, as we said, covering such a vast amount of time, a lot of these things really just aren't going to apply. And he says, counter battery fire was often frowned upon as of little value, but there are times when the suppression of enemies' artillery could prove critical. Right? So in this case, you're probably not going to do this, but you're targeting the crews. You need separate figures for the crew because every wound that goes down it gives you modifiers. It's harder to work a gun when you're looking through the tears in your eyes because they got old poor Charlie. If the gun itself is hit, you roll a d6, and 1 means nothing happens. 2 or 3, the gun is out of action for d3 moves while they repair it. On a 4 or 5, the gun is damaged. You got to roll for d6 moves, and on a 6, kablow, the barrel is gone. If you're hit by a shell, so that's round shot. If you're hit by a shell, which may or may not apply, there is a chance that the shell detonates ready ammunition. Figures within 1 base width test as if hit by another round of howitzer fire. So we have rules for lying down. I don't know if I would use those. It just adds some complexity. I don't know that it does any good. But he gives, and this is what I like. This is the kind of writing I like. And this is why I like going through these kind of flip throughs. He says, he gives you a little history first. In exceptional cases, an enlightened commander, and then he refers to Wellington, Henry's British, obviously, might allow his troops to lie down. Wellington was one of the first generals known to have allowed his troops to do this, but it became more frequent as the lethality of weapons increased. You lose 1 base width of movement. If you're targeted, your count as being in hard fire. Any troops except trained light infantry attempting to fire while prone will suffer a -2 penalty, so it's harder to hit, harder to be hit. Any troops caught while prone will suffer -3 in melee. Well, how does melee work? So that's just an example of one of the many, many like little wrinkle rules that might be a little difficult to use. Melee works, but is included as an option. You don't have to use it. The game will probably run just fine without it, but it's there if you need it. I like these kind of rule sets that have all these like bolt-on additions and weird, funky outgrowths, because it means you get to explore the rules as you play the game. So getting into melee is a bit of a sticky wicket. But once you get stuck in, and that falls under the leadership, so we may circle back to that. Once you get in, he does include rules for first strike. So if you've got a unit that is armed with pistols, then the pistols fire first. And then the melee happens. Whoever has the longer weapon, remember, we're in the 1600s. This could be a pike and shot game if you're really pushing things. So if you've got pikes, you roll to attack first. And then you apply casualties, and only then does your sword-armed opponents or bayonet-armed opponents, and he has the whole list here. Unless the infantry is in form square, when its muskets and fixed bayonets outreach all cavalry. Thrown weapons and pistols outreach pikes, which outreach cavalry lances, which outreach muskets with bayonets, unless the infantry is in square. So when you're in square, so we have this nice little Pros and cons, kind of rock, paper, scissors. Oh, cavalry beats infantry, unless infantry is in square, in which case infantry beats cavalry. Really nice options here. Forces you to get into the mindset and think like a Napoleonic, or I guess I keep saying Napoleonic, but you could be colonial, for horse and musket, anywhere in the horse and musket. And then here we get to the results, right? The side that suffers the most unsaved hits is declared the loser. Okay. So this is very simple. I did 3 to you. You did 2 wounds to me. I win by 2. And so the first thing that happens is the losers are pushed back 1 base width. Boop. So you create that space. Plus a half an base width per enemy hit. So the more damage you do, the further back you push these guys. Okay. Well-trained troops, your elite soldiers, will reduce that by 2 hits. So in my case, they'll reduce it by 1 inch. Meaning, if you don't beat them by 2, they'll stay locked in combat. If you're forced back 3 or more base widths, you break immediately and will rout on the next phase. Interesting rule for breakthrough, right? Cavalry punching through a unit, getting into the backfield, disrupting the quarterback. That's kind of good. Rules for disruption. Under circumstances, the cohesion of a unit is disrupted. This may happen because you're moving through a heavy woods, for example. And then each of these causes 1 disruption point. Disruption may be cleared off at the rate of 2 points per turn if the unit does nothing but halt and reform. So if I spend 2 turns moving through a heavy woods, it's going to take me a full turn to get back in action. And I'm going to be vulnerable at that time. Because if you have disruption, what are the rules for that? They're not listed here in disruption. I believe there is a penalty to the reaction test when you're disrupted, and to melee. In fact, we can even look at that. You want to see? Let's just take a look. Reinforcing a melee, you get +1. For each disruption, you're at -1 on your 2 hit. Okay, and the hits work the same way. Where you've got saving throws. You roll D6 hits. If you're in loose or close order infantry, it's 3 dice per base. Hitting on 4-ups. Add your modifiers. So if you're disrupted, then for every disruption marker, you're at -1. Maybe you're hitting on 5-ups, and then for every hit you get, your enemy has a save required. And of course, if he is armored, he's going to have a bonus on the save. It's pretty typical wargame stuff, right? But a lot of good stuff for Napoleonic gaming in here. And again, this rule set printed was only like $13. You can't beat that. Well, when do we test for reaction, right? If you want to charge, if you don't want to charge, how do we test for reaction? Well, that's where this whole table comes into play. There are other modifiers not listed here. Long story short, you're rolling 2d6. You're trying to get a 6 or better if you're elite, 8 if you're regular, and 10 or better if you're terrible, if you're just a bunch of peasants pushed into battle. So what are we looking at here? Well, if your size is small, you're at -2. But if you have a huge unit, you're at +2. I'll wait for the snickering to stop. If you're in cover, if the closest enemy is in cover, if you're assaulting a fortification, you're at -2 on that die roll. However, if you're standing behind, on top of a 20-foot high wall, behind a nice thick stone crenellations, if you're in a Vauban fortress, then yeah, you're going to be at +2. If you're supported, if you've got friends close, you're at a bonus. If you're all off on your own, you may have a negative. So all of these little things go in. And it's kind of interesting. Normally, we don't see this kind of table, but I like the presentation. I like that. That works for me. If you have a commander nearby, depending on how far away he is, if you're within command range, you're at +3. Okay, of an A-class commander. But if you have a B-class commander, right? Remember I said command matters. You're only at +2. And then you also have to subtract 1 for every point of disruption and 1 for every hit you suffered in this turn. So if you lost a melee and you lost 4 guys, you're at a total of -4. That's going to be a problem for you. Okay, and then we have the same kind of thing. Well, if I fail, well, how much did you fail by? And what were you trying to do? So ultimately, you're going to wind up with a whole lot of charts that you have to reference for this game. I don't think that's a problem. I mean, maybe if your book control is solid, you can just flip to the page and you got what you need. So you have all of these different definitions, right? Depending on how much you fail by and what you're trying to do, you might retire, retreat, rout, disperse, right? What do each of those things mean? Retreat, about face at the start of the movement phase of its own next turn. Deduct a quarter move distance for the process and make one standard move plus 2 base widths away from the nearest visible enemy. So that's what retreat is. Retire, right? This says 1/2 standard move. It is occupying away facing the enemy. So it's, again, you're a wargamer, you know what this is. It's the difference between falling back, running away, and just absolutely brown pantsing it on your way back to your own end zone. The unit immediately turns 180 with no deduction and just is a giggity gone, plus 3 D3 base widths. And then, of course, there's rules for, disperse. They're just gone. They're outie. And, of course, there's rules for pursuit. So, if you catch somebody and they are running away, then when you get into combat with them, it's going to go great for you. Congratulations. A couple of pages of quirky additional rules. This is on top of those that are kind of buried within the rule set itself. This is where you get things like elephants. You get flaming pigs. No, I'm not entirely happy about this option, which seems utterly revolting, but they did exist as long ago as ancient times. Naphtha grenades for your grenadiers, traps such as jungle and forest areas. A lot of good stuff in here, man. A lot of good stuff to explore. Native detachments. All right, randomized rules. Even it says, look, this is just a bunch of random stuff. Good luck. So now before we close out here, we're coming up on the time limit, and then he does say, hey, here's some advantages. Hey, here's what you can do if you're going to be gaming in 10 millimeters, right? Here's how some artillery might work. Ranges, yeah, blah, blah, blah. You guys are old hands at this. You know what it is. Native tactical movement, slink away, char, rar, 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 rar. Here's a look at the camel gunners. Now, I saved this for the end. You might have seen that earlier in the video and thought, that's a little weird. I'll stick around. The invention of one of the Aten crowd. I hope I pronounced that right. Brit Bros, can you explain to me? I'll be honest, I don't recall precisely how we adjudicated these, but I imagine we said they counted as light artillery, were able to fire overhead but -1 for accuracy, owing to the swaying of the poor beast carrying. Look at that, man. It's basically like a horse artillery, except it's got a big hump on it. And look at that boar, man. Whew! I would not want to be on the business end of one of those. Kind of an interesting rule set. For a 7 years war, we're looking at 6, 7, 8 armored close order cuirassiers, normal guns. So interesting. I don't see any colonial era in here, except for, I guess, American War of Independence. Sometimes I forget that we were colonies at one point. American War of Independence, British and Americans. Look at this. So the Americans only have one small unarmored loose order light dragoon regiment armed with swords and pistols. I think that's it. Rifles, militia. Yeah, that one small unit of horse boys. Yep. What about the Brits? Well, they have one small loose order light dragoons and that's it. Is that really it? Yeah, Highland. So both of these guys, not a whole lot of cavalry charges. They happen, but that kind of is reflective of the army styles of the day and gives you an idea if you've already got a collection of the American colonial experience or the European theater of war, whether or not this rule set is for you. Just kind of a nice light brief overview, lots of figures. Of course, I'm using 2mm, and ultimately one of the things I like to look at is how many actual, the unit of decision is, in this case, the regiment, and how many of those. I'm not deciding on a base by base basis. Oh, that sentence got away from me. It's where are these 6 units going? I don't care about the bases in them. I can line them up. I can put them in attack column, and of course, I didn't talk about that because you know how it works. Line them up, in line or in column attack, or loose. You can even put close order units kind of like all cockeyed, so that shows that they're not formed in ranks yet. But this means we got 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 12 decision units that we're operating with. And of course, once you set them up, like these four guys are all supporting each other, right? These two horse units are coming around this flank, or maybe that flank, or maybe I'm holding them in reserve and I'm supporting the attacking units. Once I've made those decisions, then it drastically reduces the decision that I have to make, like strategically, and I can think a little harder. I can take a little bit longer to decide, well, do I just want to stand and shoot at these guys that are 2 inches away, or am I going to charge them into combat? And when I get charged, I don't have to think about the other 11 guys. I just have the one decision to make in front of me. I already know what my flanks look like. So, that, I can make those semi-tactical decisions after I've already made the strategic. And I think it's going to be an enjoyable good time. Might be a little longer than most of our battles are. I might just take photos of this one when I get around to play it and just give you some thoughts and impressions of how the game plays rather than try to show you every single jot and tittle, because if this is one of those 3-4 hour games, nobody wants to watch all that. This video here has gotten too long. And speaking of, I'm praying for you.